Our next presenter was on stage last night as a drummer. That's his full-time job. He's also part-time the CEO of GoDaddy. He's a multi-talented guy. He's also one of the thought leaders in our industry. He has had fabulous success. He's been at Yahoo, he's been at Microsoft. He has kept that sense of authenticity, of creativity, of being his own person in thinking about how he's going to get growth, how he's going to move his business forward in this rapidly changing hosting industry that we're in. And Blake is going to share some ideas with you around using mashups as a metaphor to rethink our thinking, to combine new ideas, new technologies, different business models, things we've learned in the past, things we think could work in the future. And I think there's a learning point for each and every one of us here. How can we use mashups in our strategic thinking to reframe where we're going to achieve our strategic growth in the coming 18 months, 3 years, 5 years, whatever time horizon we're working on. So please help me welcome to the stage for our first keynote of the day, Mr. Blake Irving, CEO of GoDaddy. Blake, come and join us.
Hello. I am much more comfortable behind a drum kit. Much more comfortable. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, that was really fun tonight. And I just have to add, I love Soren. He was awesome, wasn't he? I mean, to get up in front of that many, I just sit behind a drum kit, but to get up in front of that many people and sing, would any of you do it? Hell no, you wouldn't do it. So I'm going to cover a couple of things today, and it's about mashups. And what mashups are to me is just taking things from the past, applying them to the future, things that seem to be completely orthogonal to each other, and smashing them together in a way that may be nonsensical, but now makes tremendous sense. And I'll talk about some things that are in the future, talk about some things in the past. I myself kind of consider myself to be a bit of a mashup as well. I have a very weird background, super weird. I was actually a musician, full-time. And I studied, like most of you in the room, fine art. Yeah. In college, fine art. My father and my grandfather, both who were attorneys, were very sure that it was going to give me a fantastic career behind the counter of a convenience store or maybe at a Renaissance fair or some such. But the thing that I found was that the combination of art and music, and I actually had a love for typography, led me into computer science and led me into computers at a pretty young age back in the very early 80s, about 1980, 81. So let's talk about other mashups for a minute. And since we're kind of on the subject of music, let's just talk about mashups in music. If you think about jazz, as an example, which is sort of the music that I'm kin to, even though I was playing rock last night. Jazz was a mashup of African rhythms and European orchestral music. And if you took those two things and you applied them together, which was done in New Orleans, it was done in Chicago, it was done in New York, it created a completely different style of music that now is more pervasive in the world than just about any other. You'll find more jazz in France than you'll find in California. But it's an important point to note that these things were completely distinct and completely different, and when you smashed both African rhythms and European orchestral music and symphonic music together, you ended up with an incredible progression of sound. And if you think about rock and roll as an example as well, if you took blues, and you applied a little bit of country music, and you applied a couple of other types, R&B, folk music, you end up with the Stones, you end up with the Beatles, you end up with Elvis, You end up with a whole bunch of pissed off people in the United States who are watching their kids dance and they don't understand it. Because when mashups happen, it makes people a little uncomfortable. It breaks laws, it breaks rules, it makes people think that disruption is the end of the equation when you start mashing things up together. And if you think about the disruption that's happened in your industry over the past decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, and what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 decades, it's pretty astounding. And you all in the hosting business today kind of feel, I think, yeah, there's some evolutionary things that are happening, but like what's really going to change the game for some of our businesses, whether it's domains, whether it's hosting? I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll talk about a next piece of my history in mashing stuff up. So when I was, anybody know what this is? Anybody? No one? This is a Xerox Alto computer. Full WYSIWYG workstation on the internet. This is actually my desk in 1981. Removable hard drive, 10 megabyte hard drive. This is 1981. On a 10 megabit Ethernet, I had a full 30-page laser printer, 30-page per minute laser printer that was 300 feet from my desk, and it worked unbelievably well. It was absolutely astounding. And when I was getting my master's degree, I was working at Xerox as well, and I could actually do papers that looked like they were published at a printer, at a professional printing shop. And I'd have all of my classmates come over and just sit around with me so I would produce their papers as well. It was absolutely brilliant. It was a mashup of local storage, of even cloud, of connectivity, of printing technology, of beautiful typography, which is how I actually ended up there. And it was disruptive as hell. Now, unfortunately, Xerox was not capable of getting this shit into the marketplace. It never entered. Never made it. 1981, full WYSIWYG. What you saw on the screen is exactly what printed out. 3-button mouse, 1981. How long did it take to get into the marketplace? And who brought it to the marketplace? I'll talk about that in a minute. I ended up leaving Xerox in about 88, I think, and I ended up going working for a company that was in the PC business. And I ended up on an interface that looked a lot like that. Now, imagine going from a full WYSIWYG workstation in 1981, and then 8 years later, finding yourself working on something that was a character user interface that had less storage, wasn't connected to the internet very well unless you were using something like Token Ring, and it was really, really tough. And that wasn't at Microsoft at the time. That was at what was called Compaq Computer, now HP. And 3 years later, I ended up at Microsoft, and they had done something called Windows, which had actually taken a lot of the concepts that were applied at Xerox almost a decade earlier and started to commercialize them. And while that was happening, Steve Jobs also had the notion of the originality of having a fantastic user interface, a one-button mouse, if anybody remembers the old Macintosh, and took it into the marketplace, mashing up the same technologies that Xerox had done almost a decade earlier. Now, when I went to Microsoft, I had a penchant for trying to mash other stuff up, and so I actually ended up taking a little bit of speech recognition, a little audio capability, building some codecs so you could actually have a computer that would listen to you, that would play things back, that would store files of audio, be able to send them over the internet and start to use them as a communication product. We were having trouble trying to connect people together, so we invented something that was sort of a combination of IRC, the IRC protocol, plus cloud contact storage, and something that was super reliable and would never go down. And we built something, me and a couple of buddies built a thing called Messenger, MSN Messenger, at the time. And that mashup of the notion of IRC, of ubiquitous connectivity, and this other thing that was just needed and seemed like an innovation at the time was the ability to see when somebody else was typing. Like, anybody who's got an iPhone today knows what that looks like when somebody's on the other end and you just see the endless supply of little circles that are going by you, telling you that somebody's actually doing something. Anybody ever seen the GIF that's amazing, that just continues to look like somebody's typing? If you don't, go get the GIF. You'll drive people crazy. It's absolutely fantastic. But if you think about mashing those kind of things up, it's an amazing sort of evolution of different technologies that come together in a really practical way. Today, if I think about one of the most fascinating mashups, think about WhatsApp. How many people are WhatsApp users in here? So that's pretty good. Now, if you were college students, every hand in the room would have gone up. If you had family that was in another part of the world, every hand in the room would go up. Because it is the crazy mashup of, I've got a phone number, a mobile phone number, I've got a data pipeline, and I've got the ability to connect to a cloud service that allows me to connect to anybody in the world. And while people were looking at the Facebook acquisition of WhatsApp as ridiculous in terms of price, anybody remember what the number was? $19 billion for a company that had about 50 people in it. Crazy number, right? Not at all. I mean, the perfect mashup that has well over 1 billion users. Folks are relying on it. More importantly, I know my kids, when they're traveling, rely on it more than they do the traditional communication channels on their phones. I do. It's the way I keep in touch with them when they're in Latin America or they're in Europe. And it is an amazingly powerful mashup of things that folks just didn't think really belonged together because some guys thought they made sense. Now, there's a couple of other mashups that you can use as examples that just totally flamed out and had billions of dollars of investment and didn't make it off the shelf. Anybody remember Microsoft Bob? No? Some of you do. Very unmemorable product. It was a very simple user interface that was a mashup of children's books and software and some other concepts that just really didn't hold. And it failed. But I think those failures that happen in things like Bob actually led to some brilliant things that we use today on a daily basis. Simple user interface. It sits on your phone today. A lot of the concepts are just as simple as they were on Bob. Even though Bob felt like it was incredibly dumb and kind of backwards because you had so much screen space, you had all the capability of a PC, and it was dumbed down so much it didn't make sense. Look at your phone today, go look at Bob, you'll see a lot of the same concepts. Anybody remember the Apple Newton? Fantastic concept. Great mashup of ubiquitous connectivity, really great local processing, some cloud processing, speech recognition, but it was a little early. And there's a story about an Apple salesperson who walks into the CEO of Random House, a very large publisher, and this very proud salesperson who had practiced this over and over again gave the Newton to the CEO of Random House and said, try it out. Just hold it and say Random House into the Newton. So the CEO takes the Newton and he says, Random House. And he looks at it and he hands it back to the salesperson and says, I don't think this is ready yet. And the salesperson looked at it and what it interpreted, and it said, condom nose. True story. So sometimes those mashups can be a little bit ahead of themselves and a little bit early, and they need to be grounded. They're all grounded in good foundations, but they actually have to be grounded in a way that makes sense from a time perspective. So if you think about sort of predicting what the next kind of disruptions are, the disruptions that exist today, and you think about that Xerox Alto that I showed you, which was this amazing amalgam of things that was commercialized almost a decade later by Apple, and still today, I think some of the concepts in either the Xerox or the Star Workstation that happened shortly thereafter, they're just making it into market today. So thinking that far in the future, taking some risks, throwing things out there that may seem almost silly and ridiculous, really end up paying off in a pretty big way. So let's talk about a couple that you might not think of as being mashups today because you just use some of this stuff ubiquitously. Some you won't think of as mashups at all probably anymore. Just think about a couple of these things. Spotify. How many of you folks in this room download Apple Music to your phone anymore? Luddites? I'm kidding, no. So look, if you think about it, 5 years ago, I was downloading stuff from Apple. Spotify was almost exclusively considered to be a European service. Now, in the US, I personally haven't downloaded a song. It's a huge cloud store of music. I can make copies, I can take them down on my unit, I just play on my phone. I actually can trade devices. It hooks up with my Sonos, it hooks up with my iPad, it hooks up with my Apple phone. I can share it with my family, all from the cloud, all on that phone. And if you thought about a personal cloud as being used for your musical preferences, yep, and there was Pandora, and Pandora did a pretty good job. Spotify is Pandora on steroids, in my opinion. How many folks are Spotify users in here? More than WhatsApp. Good, we got some music fans in here. Unbelievably powerful mashup of cloud tech, personal storage, ubiquitous connectivity, and really good algorithmic understanding of what you like, what people like you like, what your social network likes, and how to inform what they're going to do for you on your behalf. Like, by 2020, 2025, who knows where this is going to go? It's probably going to have video in it as well and be incredibly personalized, and will start actually connecting to even more of your friends. Next. If you think about super low-cost computing, which is, tiny, inexpensive, low bill of materials, low cost of goods, that sits in your refrigerator, that sits in your Nest, that sits in your thermostat, your Nest thermostat, that might sit in a camera that interconnects with each other, that has, some sort of Internet of Things protocol, which is going to get worked out eventually. Hopefully that's DNS, and it's not the two competing priorities that are in two different organizations today. Take low-cost computing plus the ability of addressability between devices plus the cloud, and you end up with incredibly powerful concepts that are not yet formed completely. I don't know how many folks in here have a Nest or know of Nest? So Nest is an incredibly smart thermostat. Very smart. Connected thermostat. I can change the temperature of my home from my phone while I'm going home. And if you have, this is just an example of, they got a little ways to go. I have 2 Nests in my home. I have one upstairs, and I have one downstairs. Now, unfortunately, the Nests that are connected on my network, even though they're connected, they don't have a single mind. So while the Nest downstairs is heating, my Nest upstairs is cooling. And it's like, watching an Amazon Echo and a Google Home give each other directions, because while the thing's heating downstairs, it's actually heating the upstairs, and that's cooling. So I have broken my air conditioner 3 or 4 times because those Nests are in a loop of cooling and heating. But think about where that's going to go over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. That'll get fixed. I'm sure it'll get fixed. But really powerful concept. Next. Take machine learning, algorithmic brilliance, a huge corpus of data. Take Siri or any other speech recognition engine, put it on top of this thing so you can both query and you can get feedback back vocally, audibly, and you end up with IBM Watson. Now, I know people architecturally you'll find a lot of laymen that think IBM Watson actually talks to you, and architecturally it doesn't. It's a big, big computing engine with a really nice user interface that could be either visual or it could be audio, could be voice. And between those two things, you end up with this incredibly powerful function that makes great commercials for IBM of people querying for medical databases, querying medical databases to get information back and doing it in a way that is so human, it feels like you're talking to a doctor. Pretty powerful concept. Okay. Amazon Go. How many folks have heard of Amazon Go? All right, not a whole lot of you. So Amazon Go is a concept. They have a store, a physical store. There's one in Seattle. And what Amazon Go does, it actually lets you walk into the store, pick up something, put it in your cart, take more things, put it in your cart, put it in your shopping bag, whatever you're doing, walk out of the store with it, and it has mapped all those items to you and builds you. That's almost creepy, right? It bills you. Now, if you walk back in and you put something back on the shelf, it takes it off your bill. The store is unattended. There's nobody in it. So if you think about artificial intelligence, applied AI, having sensors both on you and on the items that you're purchasing, and having enough smarts in an ecosystem that has the ability to find out what's coming in and what's coming out of the store, and then attach it with an individual, amazingly powerful. Now, who in God's name 10 years ago would have been thinking about actually doing that? Like, yeah, futurists would say that's totally going to happen. But these guys actually did it. Is it ready for prime time? Like some of the other things we've talked about, there are certainly shortcomings with it, and it's going to take a while to get worked out. But pretty goddamn powerful when you think about it. You know, a gas station's been doing it for a long time. You can fill your own gas up, you can get out of there, but it's all physical. You're swiping credit cards, you're pumping gas. That's not going to be the case 5, 10 years from now. All right. This is one of my favorite. This is one of my favorite ones. Formula One. I'm a Formula One fan. I'm a car guy, unfortunately. Take big data. So, and then take 3D printing. I don't know how many of you know, but they actually have to limit the amount of data that transfers between the garage, which I don't know how many of you guys have been in a Formula One garage, but it looks like a laboratory. It's got a huge bank of computers in the back. They actually limit the amount of data and transfer to, I think it's 3 teraflops per week on how much data can transfer between car and the garage, which is really basically a small data center. And they will make modifications to the vehicle in the garage with a 3D printer based on the conditions of the track. Wind, rain, I'll show you an example, which unfortunately kind of got me in trouble. All right, so I was in the Red Bull pits, and this is the garage, and you'll see these little clear things right here. You've never noticed that they're on a car because they're clear. They're basically invisible. So when they're going around the track. So what will happen is, depending on conditions of the race course, and they're getting data on how the thing's cornering, how the car's cornering, how it's handling, whether there's enough downforce, they can change weight, etc. Or they can channel wind differently depending on what's happening. Are there hills that are rising? And they'll put these things on the car. Now, here's what I didn't know. You're not supposed to take your iPhone into the pits and take pictures of the car. And here I was, proprietary. If you go out here and you look at the Red Bull car that's just outside, you'll see the steering wheel isn't one of the super complicated steering wheels. Well, there are 45 inputs on that steering wheel, if you look at it, including having the driver actually get water in his mouth through his helmet, a bunch of other capabilities on adjusting what the spin rate is of the back transaxles, etc. These pieces were manufactured in the garage during the practice rounds, during the trials. Is that gnarly? Think only about 40 years ago, people would build cars assuming what was going to happen, in Formula One, a year or a month before and not be able to make any changes to the damn thing. And now they're able to do it while they're racing. The amount of data that's going back and forth between the garage and the driver, the garage and the car, without the assistance of the driver, is absolutely insane. Nobody would have thought about it. All right, next. Now we're in your wheelhouse. Now we're in the hosting world. I know you don't think of WordPress as being a mashup, but if you think about what WordPress actually is, WordPress runs 27% of the internet today, 27% of internet sites, all on WordPress. And the reason it's become so ubiquitous and it's become such an important technology, because it took the open source model, it took a CMS, was also open source, and then it made it available to any cloud hosting provider that wanted to host it. It was free. People could charge for it if they had things that they were going to do that were different. If there were libraries, it's actually created an ecosystem, an entire ecosystem of developers, of web pros, of theme providers, of editors. And it's really more popular than any of the other CMSs or private website building products today. And more popular, more affordable, more influential, and it's because they mashed up those notions all in one and actually built a number of industries that actually create billions of dollars of wealth, of activity for tens, hundreds of thousands of people. Not just people that are hosting WordPress sites, but people that are developing them. People like GoDaddy who actually host these things, and so right now, GoDaddy, and this is the only slide I will put up here that's a commercial, basically, but GoDaddy is, a huge host for WordPress. We're actually the largest WordPress host. GoDaddy basically hosts about 10 million websites today. Most are WordPress. Yeah, and we do a lot of things that are on other CMSs as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But we have been a massive contributor to core capability in WordPress. We had a guy named Aaron Campbell on our team who has been a really important contributor to the WordPress community. We've got about 16,000 themes that we've generated that are up on our site that allow people to go pick anything they want, allows them to find it incredibly easy. Built a contact and social widget. It's got about 300K users on it today. And we built something called Easy Mode, which just makes it super simple for people to go stand up a WordPress. So if you want to go build something that's on WordPress and have all the openness and all the ubiquity that was in that mashup that I talked about, and you don't want to just go use a website building product, whether it's Wix or Weebly or ours, you can do that. And and for us, it's in every country that we serve, and we're basically in just a little bit over 125 countries today and localized in 56 markets. To do something, and I'm going to go back into sort of thinking about the long term, we're working right now to democratize CMS, democratize publishing, democratize hosting to say, look, if you are a web pro or if you are a user, we are going to take the same stuff that AWS, Azure, Google Cloud has done for enterprises, because we're all taking on enterprise workloads, and start making that one-button accessibility so a developer can say, I only want to buy this much CPU, I want to be able to scale it automatically, and do that in a super simple way. Whether it's WordPress, whether it's Joomla, whether it's Drupal, just build a container out, put it up there, and pay for only what you use. This is a near-term mashup, future mashup of enterprise-level, enterprise services, cloud services, and then a super one-click, easy point solution that is a no-brainer for customers or developers. Okay, now I'm going to get a little bit spacey on you, and this is going to be a little bit of a mashup that I want you to kind of get your head around for a minute. If you take machine learning and all the signals that come in from whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, whether it's news sources of things that are happening in the world today, and then you take a series of valuation algorithms and apply those valuation algorithms to domains. Okay. Right now, GoDaddy hosts, we basically manage 64 million of the world's nearly 300 million domain names today. $64 million. We have built valuation algorithms that has actually put a value on every single one of those domains. It would not surprise you to know that most of those domains are worth from a valuation standpoint, and this is based on historical performance and purchase history of domains that have been done and bought and sold in the past, that the value of those things is way more than what people paid for them. So if you hold, like me, 70 domains, the portfolio value is pretty damn high, pretty high. What we intend to do, I'm not going to put a timeline on this because this is kind of a future thing, is actually start exposing those valuations to users, to moms and pops that have 1 domain, 2 domains, 20 domains, 50 domains. There is a domain investor business today. Some of you may be in that business, may hold 10,000, 50,000 domains, and you know pretty much what that's worth. We did something at NamesCon this year called Estabot, and what Estabot was the algorithm being used and would let people compete against the algorithm. These are experts in domain valuation, and they'd compete with this algorithm. The algorithm won every time. And these are pros that are valuing these things. So it's like going to a Christie's auction and having somebody put a value on an item that is rare and say, I know what the price is going to be, and have a freaking algorithm be closer to the real number than you. So, if you imagine that you have a valuation algorithm that can value every domain in the world, not just the 64 million that we have, and eventually we'll come out and we'll tell you what those 64 million are worth from a valuation perspective, and make people aware that their portfolio is worth more than what they paid for it, and actually moves in value depending on what's happening in the world, because they might hold the name of a domain that is temporal in nature, and something might happen in the world that actually creates more value in a particular domain, so it will move, just like currency moves, just like stocks move, and we will start assigning portfolio value, and that portfolio value will actually be something that even brokers, traditional brokers, whether it's Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, whatever, will start looking at and saying, wow, that's a new asset class. And that's going to happen. And that'll happen, I think, in the next couple of years. Stay tuned. All right, so Alan Kay, who was a guy that I worked with at Xerox back in the early 80s, brilliant guy. There's a ton of guys there that were amazing. I always used to say the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So what I'd encourage you guys to do in your own life, in your own business, with your friends, with your colleagues, is start thinking in terms of mashing up the stuff that you're doing today, things that you think ought to happen, things that are orthogonal, that don't feel like they belong together, and start smashing them in ways that are interesting that might actually create some really rare innovation. A lot of smart people in this room, a lot of smart people at this conference. Exit your business, exit the market, get out of here for just a little minute, and think about what your future could look like. Right? So with that, I'm out. Thank you very much.